But who do you think the wide receiver 4 is, Wiz? Is Wiz? I don't know. We're going to have to work on that one. But who do you think the wide receiver 4 is?
I've gone back and forth in this quite a bit, but I will say in the last week or so, it's kind of started to solidify for me at least a little bit. I have Troy Franklin at 4 right now. I really like his game. When you look at some of the, if from an analytics perspective, he really also kind of pops off the page, right? 17.5% missed tackles force per reception. So nothing outstanding, but also nothing to sneeze at either. And he's got a season in there of, 21%, which is like what you want to see. And, for his career, when you kind of talk about that first downs per route run, 11.8, right? Like we want to see that. So he's making plays there. And then, when you talk about how he wins, this is kind of where I got excited about him. 2.49 man yards per route run for his career, and 2.6 versus zone, right? So I just think you're seeing a balanced receiver that can win in multiple ways. And those are the guys that I want, right? Those are the guys that give you the higher floor, and guys that I'm much more likely to take a shot on rather than, like an AD Mitchell or, I like Brian Thomas. I just feel like Franklin's a little bit safer there.
Yeah, right. So Brian Thomas kind of has that upside as well. Maybe the guy we like out of the AD Mitchell, Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas group certainly is Brian Thomas, but Javon Baker is knocking on the Brian Thomas door more than those other two guys in our opinion anyway. Brian Thomas, tell us a little bit about where he falls and what you're sort of, if you have a concern, what it might be with him analytically, and usually the analytics sort of tell the story of the type of player he is. It's kind of interesting. While you're looking that up, I'll talk about Troy Franklin. You're right. Like, 17% or 20% missed tackles forced per reception is really good for Troy Franklin because he sort of pigeonholes himself in some people's minds as a go deep only guy. Right. And so that's where we want to see, more than a Mecole Hardman, right? We want to see, more than a Jalen Hyatt. We want to see a guy who has a little bit more nuance, who can win in multiple ways so that he can earn more targets, and I think some of the data is showing that Troy Franklin could be that guy. Certainly, if he's closer to that type of a player, his physical gifts will certainly carry him the rest of the way. Dude is fucking fast. Brian Thomas, also fast, was very prolific in this offense. I've got some thoughts about the Jaden Daniels stuff here in a moment, but tell me a little bit about Brian Thomas from an analytical point of view.
He's a tough one, man, because he does some things that you look at and you're like, all right, like missed tackles forced per reception. Career, he's almost at 22.9, right? So, I mean, and he's got a season in there, where he had almost 50 targets and he's at 32%. I mean, that's neighbors territory right around there, right? But then when you start to kind of peel it back a little bit more, all right, first downs per route run, 8.32% for his career. And then when you kind of look at the breakdown, right, man versus route run, man yards per route run, 1.74 for his career, and zone at 1.97. Now, look, he did pop this last year, specifically against zone, 2.7 this past year versus zone. Part of me does wonder how much of that was defenses kind of looking at neighbors, and maybe Thomas gets free reign a little bit. And also LSU's defense was so bad, so they were just throwing the ball all over the yard every single time. Yeah. So he's a bit tougher for me. He shows some things, and when you watch him, like the way he moves at his size is exciting. But there are a little bit of red flags for me.